So in our previous presentations talked about the decision to go to the moon, the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs, the initial Apollo missions, Apollo 1 accident, and then we talked about I mentioned Apollo 7, 8, 9, 10. And then ultimately this led to the actual moon mission itself, Apollo 11. Apollo 11 launched in July of 1969, middle of July, with Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin. And so they took them about 3 days to get to the moon. Armstrong and Aldrin climbed into the lunar lander. It detached. They landed at the surface of the moon. Collins continued to orbit. And so when they detached, the landing site was the Sea of Tranquility, a dark lava plain on the surface of the moon. And so the lander came in, and again, it's interesting to listen to the audio of this. Again, YouTube has plenty of videos here. As the thing was coming in, they actually had a computer error that warned that the computer memory was filling up. And so, they were saying, well, what do we do? Because if anything goes wrong with landing, the astronauts die. And so they didn't want to do that. On the other hand, they didn't want to abort the mission because then there'd be not enough fuel to try again. So it'd be like one shot. You either land or you don't. And if you don't, you come back and failure. And so they didn't want to do that either. And so they were, the mission control said, well, just go on that. And then, so it was like 1201 alarm and then 1202 alarm. Basically, the computer was trying to do more than it could do, and it kind of just said, forget this, okay, reboot, okay. And good news, it wasn't Windows, okay. So it just like cleared itself and restarted and kept going from that point, but that could have been a critical thing. Mission Control decided the problem was that it was trying to, the computer, and your cell phone is like wildly better computer than this computer on board there. In fact, a lot of us have handheld calculators, which do even less than cell phones and do more than the computer on board this thing did. But still, they decided it was trying to do too much, and they had the docking radar on in addition to the landing radar, and it was getting too much data. And so they said, well, when we get close to the surface, there'll be less data for it to be dealing with, and it should be okay. So they just said, go on that alarm. So go on that. As they were coming in to land, they realized that they were landing near a boulder field. And if they land on a boulder, then they would flop over and die. And that'd be bad. So they fired the rockets to keep looking. So then they found a crater. Well, they didn't want to land on the crater because they land on a slope, they'd roll over and die. So they kept going. And I actually remember listening as they were doing this that they called up, 60 seconds. And then later they called out 30 seconds. And then a little bit later, the Eagle, which was the name of the lander, called back and said contact light. And that means that one of these little probes sticking under the feet had touched down on the surface. And then a little bit later, they said engine stop, okay, shut down, okay. And then once everything was secure, they radioed back, Houston, the Eagle, Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed. And everybody let out a sigh of relief. And now, what a lot of us did not know at the time was when they called up 60 seconds and then 30 seconds, and 30 seconds was like 20 seconds before landing, okay, that the TV anchor, Walter Cronkite, had said, wow, this was amazing. They went all this distance to the moon, such precision, they landed within seconds of the scheduled landing. Well, no, actually, they were supposed to have landed several minutes earlier than that. Okay, so this was not the scheduled landing. What they were calling out was not the seconds until landing. They were calling out how many seconds of reserve fuel before they died, before the engine cut off and they just crashed. And so, so that's what they were calling out. So anyway, they landed on the surface of the moon. They climbed down. Everybody on Earth watched these fuzzy pictures that were from a TV camera that was on a different arm there sticking out. It's actually a lot of interesting stories about that. Turns out the TV camera, in order to save bandwidth, was broadcasting on a special um, um, scan system that regular TVs couldn't display. So they actually were showing that on a special built TV monitor in the Johnson Space Center, and all the world's there was a TV camera pointed at the monitor, and that's what everybody was seeing, was the TV picture of a TV screen. So anyway, they landed on the surface, took pictures. They put up a solar wind collector to measure the solar wind and environment of the surface of the moon. They put seismographs out that measured the shaking of the lunar surface to try to find out what's inside the moon. Right before the mission, they actually the astronauts decided they wanted to put a flag up there. So they went to a hardware store and bought a cheap little nylon flag, and they take a pole here that they just stuck it into the ground. Okay, well, the problem is that when you stick it in the ground, you had to shake it to stick it in the ground. With no atmosphere, the flag kept waving like a pendulum up here. They actually had a antenna type thing extended up here to hold it. Okay, and of course those that say we didn't go to the moon, oh, we didn't go to the moon because you see the flag waving the breeze. No, it was actually shaking it like a pendulum. And interestingly enough, the period of the waving actually matches exactly what you expect for lunar gravity. So actually that's actually proof they was on the moon. Okay. They left a plaque saying we came here in peace for all mankind. They collected a few samples. The Apollo 11 mission was technically still a experiment. So this was not so much a science mission, it was an experiment. What they did was they landed, they collected a few samples just in case they didn't get to go back in later missions, and they came back to Earth. So they were really on the surface for a very short period of time. They landed, opened the hatch, went out, did stuff, closed the hatch, came back in, tossed everything they could overboard to make it lighter, took off, came back to Earth. Okay, so there's a picture of the seismograph right there being placed, collected some soil. That's actually some picture from a later mission right there. Okay, famous footprint there. Now the footprint, a lot of books say the footprint is still there. No, it's not. Okay, what happened was they had to fire a rocket engine to take off, and the rocket engine blast swept across the surface and most likely obliterated the footprint. It actually knocked over the flag. You see the flag falling over when they took off. So later missions actually stuck their flags further away. Came back to Earth. Okay, so they rendezvoused, the ascent stage, the lander rendezvoused with the mothership. They came back to Earth, splashdown in the ocean. And now this is a big deal. The President of the United States was there to greet them. Okay, so in previous missions, the astronauts went to the White House and met the president. Going to the moon, this is another world. Going to another world and coming back is enough to get the president to come visit you. And so they landed there, and now here's the other interesting thing. When they landed, nobody knew what to expect on the lunar surface. And so right before the Apollo missions in 1969, science fiction author Michael Crichton had published a novel about a spacecraft that had gone into space, come back to Earth, crashed out in the desert Southwest, and released a deadly virus that ravaged a town, called the Andromeda strain. And so they were actually kind of halfway concerned that maybe if there's a virus or a deadly pathogen on the moon, the astronauts might bring it back to Earth. Okay, now they were two different thoughts about this. One is that in remembering how when the Europeans arrived in the New World, the Aztecs, the Mayans, the native people in Central America had a rich, very well-established civilization, which was destroyed by the Europeans, not just by guns, but by disease. You know, in just within a generation's time, a major percentage, the majority of the Native Americans in the Mesoamericas were dead of diseases that the Spaniards and Portuguese and the Europeans had brought to the New World. And so they were afraid that might happen on the moon. So the astronauts put on biohazard or biowarfare gear loaned from the military when they got out of their spacecraft. They aboard the aircraft carrier, they went into a mobile quarantine unit, which was really a converted Airstream trailer, along with a flight surgeon. The idea being that they sealed the thing up, that if they had some horrible disease, then they just pick this thing up and put it in a big trench and bury it with concrete. They loaded it in the back of an airplane, flew it back to Houston, where their wives could say, hi, how's it going? You know, how's the trip? Okay. Now, they didn't have to stay in the thing forever because they had built a special building here, Building 17 at NASA's Johnson Space Flight Center, the Lunar Receiving Laboratory. They tore down the building just about a year ago. It was kind of old and obsolete, and they tore it down to replace it with something else. But the Lunar Receiving Laboratory was built, had an apartment in there, sealed, a place to handle astrobiology collections. In fact, meteorites and any other samples from space since the Apollo missions always went here for storage, and along with some of the moon rocks, and so they had to replace all that. But there they had, for example, these mice genetically engineered to have no immune system at all, running around the rocks here to see if they caught anything. They didn't. Apollo 12, the second mission to the moon, also did quarantines. But after that, they realized that the lunar rocks and lunar soil was absolutely, positively, completely sterile. There was nothing at all living there. And so they no longer worried about the quarantines after that. But they didn't know that here for Apollo 11. They had, after they got out of the quarantine, then they had ticker tape parade in New York. I collect postage stamps, so here's some first day covers here. There was postage stamp that was issued in September of 1969, a little bit after they got back. And here on the anniversary of it, many years later, so on the anniversary of it, many years later, they issued another postage stamp. And a lot of people didn't realize it, but the old Susan B. Anthony dollar coin had Susan B. Anthony, women's suffragist, on the front of it, and on the back of it was actually the mission seal for Apollo 11, showing an eagle landing on the surface of the moon with the Earth in the background. And so that's commemorated the Apollo 11 mission.